talk with the government attorneys when we weren't around, and then make references to the earlier meeting, knowing full well we weren't at an earlier meeting. But we were able to delay the project long enough in court, between the administrative appeals that I filed over a number of years and then the lawsuit, that this end of the highway basically ran out of money. They built the other end, and there really was never as much political support to build this end on the state and federal level as there was the other end. So once the other end got built, having it tied up in court helped to just weaken their resolve enough that the state agencies pretty much just gave up on building this end. And then pretty much the only person pushing it was our local mayor, and he's on his way out. And then the other key, of course, was to continue pushing the alternatives. The litigation bought us time to do some of the behind-the-scenes kind of things, like meet with school board members. I remember a cold winter evening meeting at one of the local schools to talk about where new schools should be built, and hardly anyone showed up because it was terrible weather. We were sitting in a classroom, and we had all these little kids' chairs, and I started talking about where they could build this new Chase Elementary School, and the officials didn't quite know where I was talking about. So I got out the chalk and drew a big map up on the chalkboard, and I was showing them where the marsh is and drew out where a school could be and everything. And here I had these school board members and superintendents sitting in these little chairs, and I was up in front like the teacher. It was hilarious. And here we are today, and the school's sitting right where I drew out on that little chalkboard that day. Most of them don't know that it was, that's where the idea came from, and I don't care because it got done. That was the idea. But that's been sort of the key, is on the one hand to be able to oppose it in strategic means through litigation and also in the court of public opinion with educational protests and things like that, while on the other hand pushing the alternatives to how the area can be cleaned up and utilized and protected and incorporated into an urban area. And I think that's the key pretty much with any environmental issue, is you need on the one hand to take action to the courts and other means to stop the things we shouldn't be doing and protect natural and wild areas before they're gone, while at the same time promoting alternative ways of living so that we can live in harmony with the natural areas and protect the planet. So although I didn't expect it to take 20 years, I guess in a lot of ways the battle is a real illustration of how those fights are, and in many ways how they ought to be. Hopefully more of them can be won. I hated seeing some of the natural areas at the other end go. I was there when they cut down a lot of trees and filled in some of the marsh area down at that end. It was hard seeing it go, but I get to come out here and see the geese and new life every year, so that's reinvigorating. You familiar with the Lundberg letter?
Sounds familiar.
It's an oil industry publication. Dan Lundberg is responsible for it, at least he used to be. And his son is the black sheep of the family, apparently. He's an avid environmentalist and founded the Alliance for a Paving Moratorium and traveled the country. And I had him here one time, and we were down one end of the marsh, and here I had this national expert here, and the local media came out and interviewed him, and after the formal interview, when the cameras happened to still be on, Jan was joking, and he had I don't see any growing right here, but he had a piece of teasel. Oh, there's some over there. And it's like a little hairbrush, and he was kind of putting it through his hair, joking around. And so what'd they show on the news that night? Not a good quote from this national expert about energy policy and alternative transportation, how we didn't need another highway. Instead, they just showed this guy looking stupid, pulling this weed through his hair. But we've also had a lot of success stories with the press, being able to. I always believed if I could bring everyone in Toledo, bring them right out to the marsh, that they'd all agree it ought to be saved. But since I couldn't do that, the key was to bring the marsh to the people, and media was the best way to do that. And at one point, we couldn't get no matter what event we had out here, we couldn't get some of the local TV stations to come out and show the marsh. So we decided to be creative. I said, well, you've heard of a sit-in. We're going to have a canoe in. We're going to get in canoes, and we're going to go out in the marsh, and we're going to stay there until the local media agrees to come out and show what the marsh really looks like. Because the city had a press conference at the 3 miles away at the opposite end, showing some piles of debris and whatnot, and said the whole corridor looked like that. And we wanted to show there was this big, beautiful natural area. And so, yeah, we were here for 3 days, and it was summer, and the mosquitoes were pretty voracious, but it was fun. And as we were about, frankly, to give up after 3 days, most of the folks weren't willing to stay any longer. One of the TV stations called and said, "You guys still out there?" I said, "Sure are, we're staying." They said, "Okay, well, we're coming out." Good. So they came out, and I met them, beached one of the canoes and met them up by the closest road. And that particular reporter, Al Smith, as it turns out, was afraid of water. But the story was us being out in the canoes, and so he didn't want to do something from the bank if the story was really out in the canoes. So he grabbed on both sides of the canoe and did his best to keep his posture and everything and do the interview, and did a really great interview. You would have never known that he was absolutely terrified being out in the canoe. A year or so later, he I don't remember what kind of cancer it was, but he died. He was a very young guy, and I think would have had a long, very successful news career. But it's just another example of all the different people that have interacted in some way over the years with the marsh and with the battle to save it. But certainly media has been very key to letting people be able to see the marsh and the wildlife that's here that otherwise they wouldn't. And we're still really not even scratching the surface in terms of how the internet can play a role in continuing to protect this and other areas. You know, if people can see through a remote camera, monitor some particular bird nest, whether it's an eagle nest or maybe some other kind of wildlife, and see that from their home, that'd be another way to use an area while at the same time protecting it. Some areas are best, at least some parts of areas, if we don't go there because it disturbs the wildlife. Being able to remotely monitor is a way to be able to learn from it at the same time. In fact, at one point, the great big Edison tower that we have way over there, I had negotiated with the utility to put a big monitoring camera on there, and we got a small grant to do it. Unfortunately, though, it turned out that they needed this zoom lens that was going to cost a couple of $1,000s or something for it to work, and it fell through. We weren't able to pull it off at the time, but now that the school's here, we'll probably look at mounting some things right at the school and be looking for additional support to do that.
And can you describe some of the other demonstrations of the canoe in? That's very creative, first I've heard of. And
well, we picketed at different agencies, Department of Transportation offices. I was always interested by the fact that the regional office didn't say Ohio Department of Transportation, it just said Ohio Department of Highways. And that certainly was more fitting because at the time that was all they were interested in was funding highways. They didn't want to consider alternative modes of transportation. So we protested there, and we protested at the Corps of Engineers offices.
how many people did you get?
The protests were usually fairly small. I started this effort while I was in college, so it was usually other college students and a few others from the community. The cleanups, I think, were really, some of the most effective direct actions that we had, because doing a cleanup is very empowering. We had as many as 100 volunteers at some of the bigger cleanups. We removed over 80 tons of debris on one particular occasion on a hot August day, where we had over 100 volunteers. And we know how much the tonnage was because the garbage trucks from the organization that had helped us had to weigh in at the landfill. So they kept a record of how much was brought each time. And that wasn't counting the hundreds and hundreds of tires that were hauled out that day because they went to a different location.